Hey guys, it's Meredith with phoneticfluency.com and welcome to another episode of the Fluency Habit Podcast. Today's episode is going to be a listening comprehension / comprehensible input episode. What that means is I'm not going to be talking about language learning advice generally, but rather just talking about something random in English so that you can practice your listening comprehension. This is especially useful if you are more of an advanced learner because I think there's already a lot of content out there for beginners trying to get to the intermediate stage and intermediate stage people, but I want to add content out there for people who are maybe like upper intermediate, trying to get to advanced, or maybe even people who are already advanced speakers of English who already feel that they have a really good grasp of the language, but who still want to challenge themselves and push themselves to understand English more and more, learn new expressions, idioms, and vocabulary, and especially to be able to understand native speakers when we're talking really fast and talking the way that we would talk to other native speakers. So in my content, that's exactly what I try to do. I don't modify my speech in any way for learners. I don't speak slower. I don't over-enunciate. So exactly how I'm speaking right now is how I would speak to any friend or family member who's also a native speaker. So hearing me speak in this way, if you're like an intermediate, upper intermediate, advanced kind of student of English, this is going to help you tune your ear to the actual sounds of real English, the way that we reduce and connect things and all of that good stuff. So if that sounds like you can keep listening. In today's episode, I am going to, let me rephrase that. Because in today's episode, I am just kind of rambling. I don't really have a script, as you can see by the mistakes I'm already making. I don't have a script, so I'm just going to be rambling about a topic that I've been thinking about a lot recently, which is hobbies. But this isn't going to be a basic, like, how to talk about my hobbies in English or anything like that. I am going to talk about what my hobbies are, but more towards the end, because what I want to start by talking about is the place that hobbies have in our lives as children, as teenagers, and then as adults, and why it is important to have hobbies as an adult. And then towards the end, I'll talk about like the hobbies that I like. So let's go ahead and get into it. I want to talk about first my experience with hobbies growing up. So this is unique to me. Your situation might be different if you're from another country or even from a different part of the US. I grew up in North Georgia, and I guess the main thing that I think about in terms of cultural difference is what I saw in the US and then what I saw when I moved to Mexico at the age of 5 years ago. But anyways, growing up in the US, as a kid, everyone has activities, and you'll hear me use these words kind of interchangeably today, hobbies and activities. As a kid, I think of them more as activities, because if you imagine like a small child, they've always got something they're doing. You've got to prepare activities for them. And then as you become an adolescent, like, middle school age, which would be in the US from like 11 to 13, and then as a teenager in high school, they become more like hobbies. Like, for example, in my case, my hobbies were always languages and art. So I took French and Spanish at the same time because I'm crazy. I was also trying to learn German and Japanese because, again, I'm crazy. But and also art. I've always been like an avid drawer and painter and all of that stuff. So that's, I think in the teenagers is when those kind of things become more of like a formal hobby rather than just an activity you do as a child. In middle school, my parents took me to piano class. That was the one like kind of extracurricular activity where I was actually going to a class, because drawing I just did on my own. That lasted the longest because, I did ballet and this and that, but piano, and it didn't even really last that long of a time, maybe like 3 years where I was consistently going to piano, and I can't play piano now, unfortunately. But anyway, when we're teenagers, we have these hobbies, and what I noticed in my experience is once I got into like my 20s, looking at the people around me and including myself, I feel like none of my friends really had hobbies anymore. I feel like if someone had a hobby, it was always they were always trying to find a way to monetize that hobby. And I would include myself in that because, as I said, I've always loved to draw. And when I was in my 20s, I felt like somehow in order to justify still spending time drawing or making art, I had to have some long-term goal that this was somehow going to be lucrative to me in some way. So I did still draw, but I was really trying to learn how to draw in like, let's say, a commercial way. And I was kind of like reaching out to magazines and stuff, trying to maybe be a graphic designer or illustrator. And I was also trying to sell prints and stuff like that. So I guess my point is like, I felt like in order to still have this hobby in my 20s, I somehow had to make it go somewhere, if that makes sense. Like it had to have some kind of eventual outcome that was going to be lucrative or like career oriented. And when I think about my friends, like, I mean, it's hard to say. I feel like my friends had maybe just not hobbies in the same way that I see them here. That's what I'm trying to get to. When I moved to Mexico 5 years ago, I feel like something that I really noticed is that a lot of people around me who were adults, like my age, in their 20s, I was in my 20s when I moved to Mexico, had hobbies and would very willingly invest time and money into them to like do them or get better at doing them, even if there was never any kind of long-term dream of like, I'm gonna turn this into a career in some kind of way. So no lucrative outcome was the goal. And of course, like maybe people in the comments will have thoughts about this. This is anecdotal, of course, like, you know, I'm not saying that this is true for all of Mexico or even all of Mexico City, but like the people that I have interacted with, it seems like that's the case, you know, like no matter what their job is. Like I know a guy who's like a nutritionist, but he still like invests a lot of time and money into his dance hobby and all kinds of similar things like that. And so that for me, when I saw that, was like, hell yeah, like that's super exciting and inspiring. So this really like started to give me the permission that I needed to have hobbies myself. Because I will say, like the experience that I had with art is that when I saw that this was not panning out for me, that I wasn't ever really going to be able to make art into some kind of lucrative activity for myself, eventually I felt very like, what's the word I'm looking for? I felt really demotivated, and it was like kind of a shitty feeling to be like, no one likes my art enough to pay for it. And so because I was living in this kind of mentality that in order to have a hobby, it had to possibly lead to something, and that something probably being something lucrative, I wasn't getting any kind of reinforcement that this was going to work. And so therefore I ended up with the message that this thing wasn't worth doing. So when I moved to Mexico and started to be exposed to adults who were doing hobbies and investing time and money into them, even if they were only ever going to remain hobbies, this really started to open my eyes. And it wasn't immediate. I didn't start drawing again like immediately after, but what I did do is I did start taking dance classes. And what I will say about dance is that I want to say that, like, I always end up saying that, like, I'm not a good dancer. That's not true. Like, when it comes to just, like, grooving to a beat, like, I can find a beat and I can, like, be a pretty good dancer if we're just, like, dancing in an unorganized, free-form way. But when it comes to, like, organized dance, such as salsa, that doesn't come very naturally to me because I didn't learn something like that growing up. So I find that I struggle really hard to be a good salsa dancer. But even still, I'm willing to dedicate like time and energy and money into taking classes to try to be better at it for no other reason than because I like it and it feels good to do. So that was kind of like my first foray. That's an important word. It's directly from French. You can kind of hear how it sounds that way. And it means like the first like step, the first like kind of debut or entrance. Debut is another word, which very obviously comes from French because it ends with a T and we don't pronounce it. So anyways, I started to take my first steps into like having hobbies that were very pure in that way. Pure in the sense that like I knew this wasn't ever going to lead to me being a professional dancer, but I still recognized that it was valuable to do. So let me look at my notes because where was I going next? That's kind of the thing that inspired me. So now I want to talk about like why hobbies are important, because since I have been exposed to this kind of new mentality of the other adults, or I would like to say young adults around me, now I see that hobbies are actually really important for us to still maintain even as we get into adulthood. Because having hobbies, and I can interchange that with like activities, and I'm going to talk a little bit more in just a second about like what I mean when I say hobbies and activities versus interests. But I think this is really, really important, and it's part of what makes you a well-rounded individual. Like, it's what makes you interesting to be around. It's what makes you expand mentally and even like emotionally. So when I was living in the US, and as I said, I had this personal experience, which is like the people in my circle didn't really seem to have hobbies unless they maybe thought somehow this hobby could end up turning into something else. I feel like what I observed is that myself and all the adults around me, young adults, let's say 20-year-olds, 20-something-year-olds, let's say, all the activities we did, like the actions that we were doing with our lives were like work, and then all the things that happen before and after that kind of support that or give you just like a brief mental break from that. So in the morning you wake up and you brush your teeth and you shower, and so those activities are like taking care of your body, and then you make something to eat, that's taking care of your body, and then you drive to work, that activity is part of the being at work and being productive, and then you work all day, and then you get off and you maybe, if you are like someone who has a lot of energy and are like prioritizing your health, you go to the gym, but that's still kind of like a hygiene activity. You're taking care of your body. It's not really a hobby, because I'll get to the definition in a second, but the hobby has to be like without any kind of like necessity, let's say. Okay, so if you go to the gym, that's still just taking care of your body, and then you drive home, that's still related to the work. You get home, and then here you have this like lapse of time, and what I always did with that time when I was still living in the US and working in an office, and what I saw most people do is watch TV or doom scroll on your phone. Probably by now you've heard the term doom scroll or rotting. So these are terms to describe like just the empty act of like endlessly looking at your phone to no benefit, you know? So, and in fact, to your detriment. So that is like the thing that we would do, kind of trying to recover some of the time that we've lost that has made us feel very exhausted for trying to get to work and also take care of ourselves and feed ourselves and clothe ourselves and all these things. And it doesn't really provide you with the rest that you think it does. And then after that, now it's on to like dinner and bedtime activities. So all these like activities that I was doing at this time in my life, none of them were really like for my pleasure. Now, I'm not talking about the times when I was on vacation, because obviously when I was on vacation, I was having a great time, you know, taking classes, walking around, eating ice cream, you know, like really just doing things that are just for pleasure. But in my day-to-day normal life, and, you know, during the week, I guess on the weekend maybe I would do fun stuff. But yeah, like most of the time my activities were relegated to this kind of maintenance, I don't know, area of my life. And I feel like that's what I saw for a lot of people around me too. So now let's talk about the definition of what I mean when I'm talking about hobbies. And I'll start by saying that I have always been an avid reader, and even in this period of my life when I was like, you know, following the cycle where I didn't have any hobbies, like I've always still been an avid reader. So I'm not including reading necessarily as a hobby because it doesn't fit into the definition of what I mean when I say hobbies or activities, because reading is still at the end of the day just like consumption, and it's obviously good for you consumption. It's like something that makes you grow mentally instead of making you shrink, like doom scrolling on your phone. But at the end of the day, you're still consuming. So for me, what is a hobby? A hobby is an activity that you do, I was going to say with your body, but I guess not. Like also it could be with your mind, but it's something that you do where there's some kind of progression. You can be bad at it as a beginner and you can get better at it over time. And I would say that there's some kind of result or outcome. So with that definition, learning a language does fit into hobby, because when you start, you're a beginner, and as you dedicate more time and energy of your own to this thing, over time, your result, that is like your fluency in the language, will increase. This would also be true, for example, if you are into drawing or painting. The same is true for, you know, in my example, the example I gave earlier, dancing salsa. Like I start as a beginner and I don't know anything, and then as I continue to dedicate more of my own time and energy into practicing this ability, I have a result, which is becoming a better dancer. And then there are other things where there are like very obvious results like drawing or painting, where you can actually show something that you did, and over time you can see some kind of progression. So I guess what I mean is like there has to be a creative element to it, and I don't mean like creativity like the mental, like being a creative person, but I mean like you're actually creating something, whether that's with your mouth through speaking a language, through your body dancing or swimming or riding a bike, or through like the actual production of something if you're like doing woodworking or whatever. Same thing is true, like for example, if you get into martial arts, that's a hobby because like even there's a result, even though you can't hold it, you can do it with your body. So you're creating something either with your mouth, your words, your body, or actually with your hands, a tangible thing that you can hold. But also intangible things for me would count as part of the creative process of these activities that I'm describing. So that's my definition of a hobby. And the reason that I think it's really important to include these in your life as an adult is that, I mean, the most basic way I could say is like it brings a sense of excitement into my life. Like me personally, when I create something, it makes me, if I have a creative project that I'm working on, it just makes me feel like there's this thing that has no attachment to any kind of like outcome in terms of like, let's say my success. Like I'm not going to be more successful. I'm not going to make more money. No one's going to be prouder of me. No one really cares unless I like show them and then they say, oh, that's cool, you know, like, but for me, it's just for me. That's something I didn't include in my definition. Like, at least in my experience where I have kind of tried to monetize a hobby in some kind of way, I think maybe that should be part of my definition too, is that this hobby, this like creative thing that you're doing with your mind, with your hands, with your body, with your whatever, it probably should be something that you're not trying to monetize, so that there's no like lucrative motivation for you to be working on and working towards whatever goal it is. So I got off track because I wanted to include that in my definition, but it just brings a sense of excitement into my life when I have a creative project that I'm working on, because it's like at the end of the day, when I finish my work and close my laptop, there's still something that I can work on and work towards that makes me feel excited about it. And there's a sense of progression. Obviously, I get that from my work as well, but it's just different because the motivation for this hobby is like, literally nothing will happen to me if I don't do this. So if I'm bringing it into my life, it's because I truly want to do it and it feels really exciting to do it. And then additionally, kind of, I already touched on that about the growth, like it gives you a sense of growth as a person. And I think that's a really important thing that we need to keep doing in order to keep feeling young as we become adults. Because if you feel a sense of growth in your career, like obviously that's great, but I think that's kind of maybe expected and like something society expects of us. And there's this like external motivation. Yeah, I think that's what I'm getting at. I've heard these terms, I don't remember where, but they're like, I guess maybe somehow slightly psychological terms, like extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. So I think regardless of what you're doing, even if you love your job like I do, at the end of the day, the work that you do in that job, if you're being remunerated for it, right? Oh, I'm going to look that up later. But anyways, if you're being remunerated for it, yes, then at the end of the day, at least part of that motivation for you is going to be extrinsic. But if you have an activity or a hobby that you're not trying to monetize in any way, then it's really an intrinsic motivation. Like for me, want to be better at this. Like for example, the example of me dancing salsa. No one really cares if I'm a very good salsa dancer or not. Like maybe it's impressive, but no one I think is going to love me any more or less based on how good or not good I dance salsa. So it's truly like when I try to improve the skill, it's truly just for me. And that feeling of growth as an individual that's really, really intrinsic, I think is necessary. Well, maybe not necessary, but I think it's really beneficial to us as individuals to continue to grow mentally, emotionally as adults, and therefore keep us feeling really young, because I think we have that feeling a lot when we're very young. I also think that it releases stress. So like, I don't know, you have the sense of growth and it releases stress. So if I feel stressed and I just like put on my headphones and listen to a podcast and do like some kind of activity, I'm gonna feel like happy emotions, you know, like endorphins are released based on like seeing myself grow and create something that I'm proud of. And I think it's because of that probably really good for, definitely good for like your mental health, but I think even I could say that it's good for your like physical health. And I think it just makes you a more interesting and intelligent person. I mentioned earlier that having these activities or these hobbies are part of what makes you a well-rounded individual. And I would separate these activities from, again, things like reading, which are like interests. Like I can be interested in something without it being a hobby of mine or an activity that I do. So reading is certainly one of those, and maybe you can leave me some comments about others, but there are things that I might be interested in that are not necessarily like something that I do, but when I am able to talk about these things, I'm like more interesting to others, because it's like, I think inherently we all know it's cool and interesting if someone works on themselves in some way, especially when there's no extrinsic motivation of remuneration. I'm so worried I'm going to say this word 1,000 times and be saying it wrong. Remuneration. That doesn't sound right. I think it must be remuneration. It's a word I've read more than I've actually used myself. So anyway, But the main thing that I think is really, really good about having these hobbies as an adult is that it makes you feel like a child again. I kind of touched on this earlier, but I want to talk about it a little bit more. If you think about a child, especially like a young child, if someone says to you like, hey, can you watch my kid? You better know that you need to prepare some activities, because kids just naturally are always doing many, many activities. Like I said, I think when we're children, we call them activities, and then when we become adolescents and teenagers is when we start to call them hobbies, because I guess maybe it's like more of a choice that we want to continue it, and we have to like seek it out to do. But as children, I think we just call them activities, because, you know, like it doesn't matter if your kid is like particularly, there doesn't exist like I think a kid who's like likes drawing and doesn't. Like some might like it a little bit more than others. I was certainly one of those kids, so I got art kits all the time for every Christmas. But like every kid draws with crayons, you know what I mean? And like every kid plays in the water if there's a hose or sprinkler or creek or something, and every kid likes to walk barefoot on grass, and every kid likes to dance. That's a whole other topic that I would like to talk about. Maybe not in this video, but I think that we all deep in us like to sing and dance, because have you ever met a baby who, if you put on music, won't like bounce along to the beat? No. So anyway, all children like do these activities, and then as we get older, we kind of like latch on to the ones that will become our interests and our hobbies. But it's just like naturally, as children, we are drawn to creating and like doing things with our minds, hands, and bodies. And as we become adults, we shift away from that and start taking care of only the things that are necessary for our survival, and taking care of our body, and like being productive at work so that we can make enough money to live, and these kind of things. So when we do that, again, not saying that's the case for everyone, but it's just something that happened to me, and certainly to a lot of the people around me. And when we do that, we're losing touch with our inner child, because as a child, we all naturally gravitate to these kind of creative pursuits and activities without even having to call them that. It's almost like just the default for children. And so when we stop doing that, we are losing touch with our inner child. And I think that like what makes us stay young in many ways, like stay young physically, emotionally, mentally, and like even spiritually, is staying in touch with our inner child. And I think one of the strongest ways that we can do that is to have hobbies. So we all need to have hobbies. So now I'm going to talk about my hobbies, and I'm going to divide this into two parts. I'm going to talk about the hobbies that I am currently doing, and then I'm going to talk about hobbies that I would do if I had more time. So I've been kind of skirting around this. This is an important vocabulary. To skirt around something is to kind of like avoid it, to like I'm getting close to the topic but not quite touching the topic. And so now I'll tell you a little bit about my hobbies. But the reason I'm going to divide this into my current hobbies and then the hobbies I would do if I had more time is because my problem is a lack of time. If I had all the time in the world, I would pursue all the things that I'm interested in, which are a lot. But even though I work from home, which certainly helps me to have a little bit more free time than if I commuted, just like everyone else, I am very busy. You know, this is my full-time job, teaching online and creating content, which is connected to the teaching business and da-da-da. But, you know, I'm very busy, and so I have to choose what I have time for. If I just followed my whims and like tried everything that I was interested in, I would end up trying new things every single month and having to drop several other things every month because I wouldn't have time for all of it, simply said. For me, in that case, limiting the number of activities that I stick to and that I get into in the first place is a form of self-discipline. Because all the time I find things that I like want to do in little workshops and things like that and classes, and I'm like, I would love to do that. But I limit myself and I don't sign up for those because I know that if I did, then that would like take away from the time that I have to dedicate to some of the other activities that right now are more of a priority for me. So with that being said, the things that I am currently dedicating time to and making time for, my hobbies, that is, are crafts, like arts and crafts. Not so much drawing and painting, but I'll explain more in just a second. So crafts, dancing salsa, although I really could be putting more time into that than I currently am. Portuguese, learning Portuguese, doing calisthenics, which is on the line because, like I said, to me, gym is kind of in line with hygiene. Like, you know, you're supposed to be working out the same way that you like supposed to be brushing your teeth, you know, so that one's on the line. But I include it here because calisthenics is sort of new for me. I used to go to the gym, like a normal gym, and I've decided to do calisthenics instead. So anyway, and the final thing is having a social life and trying to basically be outside and out of my house as often as possible. So now I will kind of like, keep rambling about some of those. So let me talk about the crafts. If you are listening to this episode and are not watching, then maybe go watch on YouTube, because I'm going to show you some examples. One example that I have on hand is this table that I'm painting. This is a basic IKEA table. So this is the top part, which obviously I painted a tiger on, and I painted it pink. And then, let me show you the legs. I painted the legs like this, and I'm happy with the colors, but I wanted it to be a little bit more gradient. So like here you can see that like clearly it's like 1, 2, 3 colors, and they do blend together a little bit, but I would rather them blend together a lot more so that the gradient looks like one really smooth gradient instead of like 3 colors that are slightly faded together. But my idea is like to finish that and then put them back onto the table and like maybe paint the table, like the edges of the table, a different color, like a reflective gold thing. And then I have to buy a sealant, because I have a sealant that's like glossy, but I want a matte sealant for this. So this is just one example of the kind of crafts that I get into, but I love crafts. This bracelet that I'm wearing, I made. It's nothing special, but I made it. And yeah, another craft that I do a lot that I don't have an example of right here is I love making nails. And I say making because I don't have nails on right now, but if you ever see me with nails, like most likely they are press-ons, but I buy the press-ons like little, stick-on nails or whatever that are the shape of a nail, and then I cut them to the size that I want them, and then I put them onto like a little holder, and I can paint whatever design I want on them. And this is good because I don't have to do like damage to my own nails by sticking them under the UV lamp, and also I can be much more careful because I can remove just one nail and paint an intricate design on it and then put that under the UV lamp. And then I have these nails that are also reusable, so I glue them on and then they look pretty real. I don't know, there's at least one video on my channel, I'm sure, where I have my nails painted, and so you can see what I'm talking about there. But I enjoy this so much. It feels so fun. I love putting on my headphones and listening to a podcast and painting for a while, like one of these kind of things. Like I'm not normally doing like just typical paintings. If I'm painting, I'm probably painting something like a piece of furniture or like a collage or like something that's gonna somehow be part of my house, or doing nails, and I love doing that kind of stuff. So those are like the craft things. I have many more examples. Those are just like, this is the craft that I'm working on presently that I have on hand. So like all that stuff I was talking about earlier about the feeling of having a creative project that's ongoing and like the sense of accomplishment, because this table, I've been working on this table for a while. Like I had this ugly IKEA table in my house, and like as I started to kind of acquire other furniture and decorations that had more of like, excuse me, like a proper feeling and like style to them. Even my boyfriend said to me, like, that table doesn't go with this, it doesn't match. And he was right, and so I didn't like it either. And so the idea came into my mind, like, we got to get rid of that table and replace it with something cooler, something that matches the vibe of the house. But I was like, what if I just paint it? Because I had been getting into painting other things with acrylic paint recently too. And so then I was able to go to Fantasias Miguel and like buy the paint and like imagine how I wanted it to be. And then like, part of the reason it's taken so long is I tried something on the top part, like I don't know what to call it, like the main part, the table part. And I didn't like it, so then I had to paint over it, which took a couple days. And then like this, I'm kind of seeing how it goes as I go along, but it's like the sense of accomplishment of like each day I know that when I finish work or even between work, because sometimes, acrylic paint dries pretty fast, so I can but sometimes it requires like a million different coats, so I can go like put a coat on real fast and then like do my other stuff and then come back and put another coat on. But like knowing I have this one creative project that's ongoing over a long period of time and eventually is going to result in me having something really cool, this table that's going to be like super cool when I'm finished. And then when people come to my house, they're going to see this table and be like, oh, that's so cool, where'd you get that? And I'll say, I painted it. This is such like this is exactly the feeling of like excitement and personal growth that I'm talking about. So that's crafts. The other thing is dancing salsa. And as I said, like, this is something I should be dedicating a little bit more time to, because right now, the only thing I'm doing is taking one-on-one classes, because in total, I've been dancing salsa for like probably 4 years. I would maybe remove 1 year from that because I have not been doing it regularly. So like I'll go through a phase where I'm dancing very regularly for like 3 months, and then I'll go through a phase of like 5 months where I don't go dance at all. So it's been like a non-linear progress. But when I first started, I didn't know how to do anything, and now I at least know how to look like I know how to dance, which is kind of the reason I sought out a one-on-one teacher, because I reached this place where like I knew how to dance enough to look like I knew how to dance. So if you don't know how to dance salsa and you were sitting on the sidelines and watched me dance with someone, it would look like I could dance pretty good. But if you knew how to dance salsa and watched me or danced with me, you would be like, maybe not so much. And so I realized like, how could I get to this level where even in like classes, I could go, you know, here in Mexico City, they tend to divide classes into like beginner, intermediate, advanced. And I could go to the advanced and I would like make it through the class, you know what I mean? And be able to do the things. And I was like, how is it that I have made it to quote unquote advanced level salsa dancing, but I feel like my basic step isn't even that good? And I was like, this is wrong. This is a problem. So I sought out a teacher who I had like seen, I had taken some classes with before and kind of, but like group classes, you know? And I saw that he was particularly very good about like the rhythm, like how the music of salsa works and how your body like reacts to that and like the consequences of the body. What I mean by that is like kind of what I've been seeing now that I contacted him and started taking one-on-one classes with him, which have been so useful. But it's about like the fundamentals, you know? So like, for example, when you're doing a basic step, the foot you step with, this is so hard to explain without actually doing it, but like basically which foot you step with, which arm goes up, which shoulder goes forward, which hip sticks out. All of this is connected. It's like one thing is a consequence of another. So like when you put your foot down and then transfer the weight onto that leg, as a consequence of the weight transfer, that hip will go out. And as a consequence of that hip going out, this shoulder comes forward. Like, you see what I mean? These are the kinds of things that even after years of dancing salsa in these kind of group classes and even making it to a quote unquote advanced level, I still didn't know. And that's why I was like, I need to be working with someone one-on-one because I want to be good at that stuff too, so that then like the actual dancing is like proper and like looks really good, because there's nothing like dancing. I don't know. I mean, when I rank the activities I've done in my life in terms of fun, one of the most fun things I've ever done in my entire life was snowmobiling. Like, it's like a four-wheeler, but on the snow, you know what I mean? And I did that when I lived in Colorado, and that was like peak fun. Like, to me, that was more fun than riding a roller coaster, and I love riding roller coasters. But dancing salsa is like, okay, so here's snowmobiling. And dancing salsa at times, not every time, like a couple of times out of, you know, let's say one out of every 5 times, let's say, can get like really close. And I think the reason that it feels that way is because it's like such an embodied experience, it's such a flow state experience, because this is very similar to what I teach in phonetic fluency. I teach you the basics and we drill them and drill them and drill them and drill them with a really high level of concentration, so that your body can absorb what I've taught you. It can create muscle memory so that at the moment that you start speaking, you don't have to think about it anymore, because your body just takes over and just does it. And the same thing happens when you're dancing salsa. So you drill these certain steps and movements a million times with like a high level of concentration. And then when the music comes on and the social starts and you just, like, someone asks you to dance and you start dancing, there's no way you can think like left foot, right foot, 1, 2, 3. Like it can't happen. It's just like really not possible. So it's one of those flow state activities. I imagine skating is probably very similar, where like when you're skating, it's a purely like corporal body experience where you can't think, okay, I need to do this with my foot and that with my foot and this with my, you know what I mean? Like, so when I dance salsa, there's nothing like it. It feels like I'm getting high. I don't know. Anyway, so, but in order for that feeling to happen, it requires me to be decently good at it. And at the beginning I wasn't. And then like over time, I can get to the point where I can now have that feeling. So I think that the better you are at it, the more you're able to enter into that flow state. And I'm talking about salsa, but I think this is true for like a ton of activities. So the other activities I mentioned were Portuguese. It's 2026 recording this video, and I think I've been saying since like 2024 that I was going to learn Portuguese, or maybe even longer, because it just like, I knew that that's the next language I wanted to learn after Spanish. But at first the thing holding me back was feeling like I could still improve my Spanish, which I had to get over, because I think I will always still be able to improve my Spanish, and kind of realizing like I'm fluent enough in Spanish now that introducing a third language, I don't think is going to prohibit me from like continuing to improve my Spanish. And I also feel like part of it too was like I did dedicate so much time to Spanish, and it really was like having another part-time job on top of like the full-time job and life that I have outside of language learning. So I guess I felt scared. I was like, oh my God, that was a lot of work that I had to do to learn Spanish, and I don't want to have to like dedicate that much time again to learning Portuguese. So that was one of these like limiting factors, and I had to get over it. And I had to say, you know what, like even if I spend only 1 hour a week, I'll get there really slow, but I'll still get there and it'll still be fun. So Portuguese, I'm taking like kind of like one-on-one class a week, and then, you know, trying to like watch some content, study Anki and those kind of things. So I'm not taking it very seriously, but it's like enough to like constantly have a little bit of forward steady momentum. And then the final thing that I talked about in terms of my current hobbies are social life and trying to be outside as much as possible. And this just means like doing stuff with friends that is not like just being indoors, because as someone who works from home and surprisingly, maybe it will come as a surprise to you, is introverted, it's easy for me to be at home all the time. Like I would consider myself a highly social introvert. What I mean by that is like I love people, I love having friends, I love doing social things, but kind of at the end of the day, I need to be by myself to recharge. And I could also go for pretty long periods of time being alone and like with my own company and be perfectly happy with that. I love spending time alone. Like I said, earphones, podcast, crafts, I could have a great time by myself for a really long time. So at the end of the day, I would consider myself introverted because of that. And because I'm introverted and I work from home, it's very easy for me to stay in the comfort of my own home. So I have to push myself to do these things, but when I do, it's like a huge payoff because I feel so much more whole and complete when I spend time outdoors, like under the sun, hopefully in a park, hopefully a little bit of nature, and surrounded by other people other than like myself and my partner. So that can be like anything, like let's go to the park, let's get out of the city and go to like a national park surrounding Mexico City, let's ride bikes somewhere, let's go to a club, let's try a new restaurant, let's like do this workshop that we found, just like trying to spend time outside, you know, like let's go to El Centro, you know, just like being away from home, and like even if there's not a particular objective to do, just the feeling of being out and about. So that's kind of like something that's a priority for me. I don't know if that counts as a hobby, but I don't know. It's something that doesn't have any kind of lucrative objective, and I feel more whole when I do it, but it doesn't have a sense of progression. So I don't get better at it. Anyways, that's the kind of other thing that's one of my priorities right now. So because I make time for prioritizing these things, obviously that means I have to say no to a lot of other things. And all the stuff that I mentioned doesn't even include like all the stuff that I do for work. So I have to do a lot of research, I do a lot of reading, I do a lot of like business and marketing kind of research and reading and watching videos and that kind of stuff. So that in itself is also time consuming, but that's like during work hours, so whatever. Anyways, outside of work hours, those are the hobbies that I make time for. So if I had all the time in the world and could like do all the hobbies that I want to, the things that I would do is are salsa, but more. So like, as I said, right now I'm kind of doing like maybe 1 or 2 classes one-on-one a week. And really, if I wanted to progress more rapidly, I would need to do those classes and group classes and go out dancing a lot more than I do. And I don't. Part of the problem for me with salsa is that it is such kind of a nighttime-ish activity. And I like to be in my house at those hours. So that's part of it. But anyway, like that's one thing I would do more of if I had more time, dancing salsa, but more. I would also love to take singing classes because I'm one of those people who like, here's like good singer, here's like decent singer. I'm like in the lower range of a decent singer, but I think that like probably I could become good if I had some kind of training, because I was never in chorus or anything like that. So yeah, I would love to take singing classes, but I've decided for now, even though maybe one day in the future I will, I've decided for now it's not in my priorities, because if I start taking singing classes, like there's not going to be time for all the other stuff I mentioned. So it's just not the moment. Another thing is drawing or painting classes. In this video, I've alluded to the fact that I have always loved drawing and painting, and I kind of like tried to, as I became an adult, I felt like in order to maintain this hobby in my life, I had to justify it by almost like trying to monetize it. And then that didn't work, which really demotivated me. And then I like abandoned it. And so that was really bad, like to abandon a really big part of who I am and my personality, because I've always been an artist. I've always been a drawer and a painter. And I've spent, I think, several years not drawing or painting because of that. And I would say that with this kind of craft stuff, I've gotten back into it, because like I painted the legs of this table, and I painted the tiger that you saw on the table. But anyways, I found a teacher who teaches like drawing classes, drawing in charcoal, and I liked the teacher a lot, and I enjoyed going to the classes, and I ended up not continuing just because of time constraints. I would like to take that up again. It was like the first time that I felt in a really long time that I was drawing and I felt good about the outcome of what I was drawing, and also like there was hope for me to become even better than I was. Actually, I think I have some drawings over there. Let me see if okay, I'll show you. He had me draw some dogs when I first started. I think that was the first drawing I ever did in class with him. And some kind of still life stuff. Something fell. Okay. Anyways, drawing. That's one thing I would do. Drawing classes, like specifically kind of like working with someone to hone and improve that ability. That's something I would do if I had more time. And what else? Woodworking and carpentry. Oh my God. I am like so into that. Kind of going hand in hand with like the crafts that I'm doing, which are often quite home related. Like for example, kind of curating my home and making my home feel like somewhere I like to spend time in. Like I like that stuff. Like I like having an eclectic style and like kind of picking up things and finding cool artifacts and stuff like that I'd like to display in my home and like displaying them in a certain way. So I like that. Like I like expressing my creativity in that way as well. But I want to make furniture. Like this is like high priority. I'm mentioning it towards the end, but if I had more time, that's probably the first thing I would do is like take carpentry or woodworking classes to learn how to create furniture for myself. And then not the final thing, but like the penultimate thing would be analog photography. I have a camera here kind of just for display because its light meter is broken, but it does work. I like analog photography. I've always liked it because when I was a kid, like a teenager, I remember, Tumblr was a thing back then, and the kind of images that I saw that I liked always had that grainy analog camera look. And I just felt like every time I took a picture analog, like with a disposable camera, because that's how I started with disposable cameras. Every time I took pictures on a disposable camera and got them developed at like Walgreens, which I guess you can't do anymore, I felt like those photos just automatically looked cool without me having to have done anything to it. Like I could take a picture of anything and I felt like it looked cool if it was analog. So I started with the disposable cameras and then eventually kind of like worked my way into real cameras. And this camera I always had because it was from my grandma and I ended up with it. And it was really fascinating to me realizing that like this thing that had just been sitting around was actually usable, because like analog cameras kind of work that way. They're very analog, you know what I mean? Like it needed a battery for the light meter, but even that's kind of optional because you can use an external light meter. So anyway, I would say this is an activity that I do. That is like, I know how to use an analog camera. I even know how to develop film because I've taken a workshop about it, but I wouldn't do that myself. But anyways, like I do sometimes take pictures, but the thing that makes me not participate in this hobby very regularly is kind of this like weird feeling of guilt, because I even now have a back catalog of many, many pictures that I've taken and have gotten developed, and they're really cool pictures and I'm proud of them, but they're not out in the world because I never post them on Instagram. And this ties into like the last kind of activity I would do if I had more time. I wish that I had time, and I wish I felt motivated to like post more on social media as myself, not as Phonetic Fluency, like to the analog photos that I take to actually edit them and post them on Instagram. I don't know why, I just never do. I also don't spend a lot of time on Instagram myself, like watching content or seeing what other people are posting, so maybe that's part of it, but I wish that I prioritized that more. Yeah, just sharing more of myself online, which thanks to you guys watching this, I guess I'm doing now. But anyways, like these two kind of go hand in hand. I have these photos that I have taken, which are really cool photos, and I wish I would share with the world, and I just don't know why I don't just post them. And therefore, because I have these photos that I feel like I haven't necessarily done anything with, I haven't printed them and put them somewhere, I haven't posted them on Instagram, I feel like I don't need to be taking more pictures. So that's kind of why analog photography goes into this category of things I would do if I had more time, even though it is something that I would say that I kind of semi-actively do. Okay, so I guess I have talked for a really long time, but I am getting lots of comments and feedback that you guys do like the very long form content. So hopefully this ends up being the case with this video as well. So yeah, I would consider myself as a person with very many interests. If you have tips for managing multiple interests when you have several interests, please leave them in the comments. If you want to share something about yourself, feel free to do that too. Maybe you guys can start some kind of conversation in the comments to practice your English. Let me know if you like this style of video, because I am reading the comments very regularly, and this kind of stuff helps me understand what I should do more of, what you guys like, and it also helps me stay motivated to keep creating content in general. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.